You are now a suicide loss survivor, bereaved by suicide, or survivor of suicide. But what does that mean? This is the definition I've found. A survivor of suicide is a family member or friend of a person who died by suicide. Anyone who is close to someone who died by suicide or feels affected by it is a survivor. You do not have to be a family member to feel the impact of suicide. I was exposed to suicide several times before my son took his life, and I really never understood it. And now that I am involved, and not by choice, mind you, I want to learn as much as I can and educate others. And with that, I'd like to share some statistics and some facts. I want to start first with a question a friend asked me. He asked me if suicide grief was harder than other types of loss. I took a moment to answer this question because I have personally struggled with why I feel so different in my grief between my daughter, my 9-month-old daughter who died in a daycare accident, and my 24-year-old son who took his life. I concluded that suicide bereavement is not harder because there's no comparison between cancer, illness, suicide, or accidental death. All of it is hard. What I did tell him is that child loss by suicide has its own incredibly unique set of challenges. It's different than other modalities of death. So today, in our time together, we will be talking about the complexities, messiness, and complications that arise as a result of losing a loved one to suicide. I have found that understanding suicide is critical in helping you to accept your loss without judgment, shame, or guilt. Let's dive into those complexities. I don't know about you, but after my son died, I started researching suicide. I wanted answers and found they provided me some relief to my anguish. Through my research and my own experience, I did get answers, at least as much of an answer as I will ever get. I looked at all his Facebook messages, his cell phone texts, his pictures, and listened to his voicemails. I spent time talking, maybe more like interrogating friends and family that were with him days and weeks before he passed. What did they see? What did they tell him? What did he tell them? I spent months in this insane investigation mode. I wanted and demanded answers. And when I started putting my answers together, it's like I had run an intense investigation of a crime, looking for the who, what, when, where, how, and why. No stones were left unturned. However, there was still a part of it that was a mystery. You may find yourself in the same place, the answer to why. We want to make sure that we don't get stuck in that canyon of why. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. So I feel it's important to know the rest of the story, part of that investigation, because it helps with understanding why. Who dies by suicide? It is our loved ones, brothers, sisters, fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, grandparents, friends, cousins, co-workers. They are the ones that we love so deeply that the pain is unbearable. Then the risk of suicide varies greatly by age, sex, and race, and by personal characteristics, including education, occupation, family history, and place of residence. It can be the kid down the block getting through high school, the dad working in the office, or grandfather who works on the factory floor. It even takes young moms staying at home, retired grandparents, or the drug addict on the street corner. Men have a higher suicide rate. That rate of males to females is 4-1, but women have a higher attempt rate. Suicide affects all ages, anywhere from 10 to 90. It is the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34, the fourth leading cause for ages 34 to 54, and the fifth leading cause 45 to 54. Simply put, suicide knows no age, sex, race boundaries. What is suicide? Suicide is defined as death caused by self-directed, injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of their behavior. Now, a suicide attempt is a non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of that behavior. And a suicide attempt may not result in injury. Then there's suicidal ideation. It refers to thinking about, considering, or planning a suicide. Suicide is not an act of selfishness, weakness, or cowardness. I want to repeat that. Suicide is not an act of selfishness, weakness, or cowardness. Now, suicide is a major health problem with more than 800,000 deaths worldwide annually. There are currently over 47,000 suicide deaths in the US. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the US, which is two times as much as HIV and AIDS. And then when do most suicides occur? This might surprise you. We've been led to believe that suicide increases with holidays and days getting shorter. Research shows the opposite. It suggests that the prevalence of suicide is greatest in the late spring and early summer months. In 2016, most recent year for which data is available, the months with the highest average daily suicides were August and July. The previous year, it was May, July, and March. And as for the time of day, there's inconclusive research for the time, except that few occur in between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. Other than that, there's no rhyme or reason why a person chooses to end their life or when. In the days of the week, suicides occur most frequently on Mondays for both females and males, and for most age groups. Where do suicides occur? About 3/4 of suicide incidents occur at home, and most, about 85%, die at the scene and never make it to the hospital. Suicide rates are highest in rural areas, and there are 3 popular locations throughout the world for taking one's life. The leading site is the Golden Gate Bridge in California. Second is Bumper Bridge in England, and the third is Sunshine Skyway Bridge in Florida. How does suicide occur? What are the methods used? Now, in my research, the methods of suicide actually surprised me. Maybe it's because of the multiple suicide losses that I've been through, or by the means which my son ended his life. But firearms are now used in more suicides than homicides, making it the fastest growing method, which is nearly 60% of all suicides. Next is hanging, suffocation, and strangulation, which comprise about 20%, and solid and liquid poisons plus overdoses comprise 10. Gas poisons are 6, and the balance of those suicides are completed by jumping from high places, like I mentioned, those bridges, into fast-moving objects, burns, fires, and intentional crashing of a motor vehicle. Now, why? Why is the million-dollar question? So I've got some potential reasons for their decision. Often it's the result of long-term difficulties with thoughts, feelings, or experiences that the individual feels they cannot bear any longer. Among other things, a person might contemplate suicide, maybe feeling sadness or grief, shame, worthlessness, intense guilt, rage, or a desire to seek revenge, thinking they are a burden to others, they have no worth or value, that life is not worth living. They are trapped, either physically or emotionally, that things will never get better, intense physical or emotional pain. And then many factors can contribute to a person feeling this way. It may be due to events happening in their life, the loss of a loved one, bullying, discrimination, or abuse, the end of a relationship, a major change in life circumstances such as divorce, unemployment, retirement, or homelessness, receiving a diagnosis of a life-changing illness, problems with money, being in prison, pregnancy, or loss of a pregnancy. or even questioning one's sexual identity or gender in an environment that is not accepting of this. Certain cultural practices, such as a forced marriage or possibly surviving a traumatic event. However, suicide does not always occur because of a specific life event, and not everyone who experiences these events will consider suicide. People respond to adversity in different ways. More than likely, it's a combination of many of these events and feelings. Then one day, one simple thing can become the weight on your loved one's shoulder they can no longer bear. They felt the only choice was to end it all. What we do know from those who have attempted suicide and were not successful, they were in a lot of pain, physically and mentally. All they want to do is end the pain. It's really not to end their life. It was to end the pain, and the only way to end the pain is to end their life. The answer of why will not be fully revealed. You can guess all you want and presume what it was. The fact is, you will never know the 100% truth. I really wish it were different. I wish I had the answers. Know that asking why is normal, and that at first it may feel impossible that you will get beyond that question, but eventually you will find a way of thinking that you can accept or live with it. And that's why we're here. So here are a few other things that contribute to the complexities of those bereaved by suicide. Suicide survivors are left with a need to find answers, and that's what we're talking about. Survivors want to take responsibility for their loved one's death. Survivors experience high levels of guilt. There's social stigma around suicide. The loss of someone close by suicide increases the risk of those close to them to choosing suicide also. Unlike other non-violent deaths, the loss of someone by suicide can lend itself to PTSD. Survivors experience feeling lack of control. Dreams and hopes for the future are lost for the deceased and for the bereaved. Suicide is traumatic to the brain and body of those who are left in its wake. This is where we talk about the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual symptoms of grief. It is difficult to find support for survivors of child loss by suicide. Survivors tend to focus on how their loved one died rather than the life they lived. Some believe taking one's own life is a sin. You feel ashamed that your loved one took their life. You want to hide it was a suicide. We may be angry at the deceased. Guilt over being happy or experiencing joy. Every death by suicide leaves behind at least 130 people who report they knew them. Of course, it is likely that at least a third feel remarkably close to them and need postvention. This creates about 1 million new people who are directly impacted by the suicide of someone close to them. I am sorry that you were part of that 1 million. And as a side note, postvention is considered to be activities which reduce risk of suicide and promote healing after a suicide death. You're participating in postvention. Learning about suicide's complexities, messiness, and complications is a good place to start in accepting the loss of your loved one.